Welcome to Clown as Tactic of Revolution by Clownbloc. Woohoo. Um, okay, so this is going to be a kind of long presentation. The first chunk is going to be just like a cultural deep dive on how clown has popped up all over the world in various different ways throughout time. And then we're going to apply revolutionary analysis to it so that we can think about how all of these different manifestations of clown have been used for social and political change across space and time. Um, so that's the format. Okay. Also, my name is Mob. Hi, everybody. So we have some questions for you to contemplate, and you have a bunch of doodle supplies in front of you. I invite you to write down some questions that you may have about the cultural and historical development of clowning, and what questions you have about how clown functions as a political tactic. And we'll keep returning to these questions and seeing how your curiosity develops. Yes. So our cultural education portion, we chunked out the world into these relative continental clumps to talk about how clown has popped up. I'll just say we're trying to cover, all of time and space. So this is going to be a very rudimentary scratch at the surface. I also, I'm going to say North America and South America, and we all know that that's not what the indigenous people called it. I called it that so that the most people could understand what I'm talking about. It's Turtle Island. And there's a lot of ways that the land and the culture that I'm talking about has indigenous history and language that I don't know. So just to keep that in mind too. But yeah, we'll get started. So starting off in the Middle East, we got Egypt. And Egypt, in so many ways, was kind of the beginning of humanity experimenting with art in ways that we are able to really dig into now because the record keeping was so good. So some of the first known clown showed up in ancient Egypt. And it's also one of the times that clown shows up in an oppressive manner. So clown has not always been a privileged or powerful position. In some places it is where folks that have physical disabilities are kind of forced to be entertaining. So that did happen in ancient Egypt. That being said, though, being a clown did offer a certain amount of agency and power for those people. So it's complicated. And they took up the role as court fools in the court of the pharaoh. Oh, also, I'm going to butcher so much of this language, so bear with me. But the court of the pharaoh Dad Kari Asi during Egypt's 5th dynasty. Ancient Egyptian pharaohs were typically pretty fascinated with little people and folks with disabilities, and often would employ them as these jesters, but they were called dangas there. So it wasn't, sometimes they were forced into it, sometimes they weren't forced into it. Complicated social scene. But also we find some of our first emergences of circus show up in ancient Egypt. Juggling was big. Acrobatics were big. Hieroglyphics really show off all of that. But moving along to Syria right now, the two dudes that I have pictured up there, this is a more contemporary example. This is Ahmed and Mohammed Malas, who have become renowned for a physical comedy play that they created in their bedroom during the uprisings in 2011. And the play really worked to stage a conversation between a police officer and a detained protester. And And even though this is something that a lot of people in their community were dealing with on a daily basis, it was extremely taboo to talk about it. And it was super duper taboo to make art about it. And so doubly so in that in this play, the twins, these guys are twins, criticized the police and criticized the system through comedy and through physical comedy, and really advocating for the Syrian people's basic rights to be upheld. And it actually went on to get toured all over the place. It went to Russia, it went to France, it went to Beirut, and they ended up being arrested for the play, but they kept performing it inside of prison. So they're super incredible. Then over to Palestine. We'll get into Palestine a little bit more later too. But Palestine actually has a pretty impressive circus school, especially for kids. It's a place where kids are sent to learn an art form that expresses what they're going through through like physical theater. For those of you, I guess we should have done like a clown 101 before we did this, but clown it can be a lot of different things, and at its base is really just physical theater. Sometimes it's funny, sometimes it's not. It usually ends up being kind of funny because it is very relatable. But yeah, Palestinian kids have been going to this circus school for a long time and really learning in particular how the relationship between laughter and crying, and how to oscillate between those two things and what the role of those two things is in getting through your life, and also creating sustainable means of ongoing community. They teach circus pedagogy, and circus is considered a really valuable way to develop a kid's physical, mental, artistic, emotional, social, and cognitive abilities. And then they send these clowns, these circus kids throughout the community to go help people. And we'll get into one of those clowns later, so I'm not going to talk too much more about it. On to Lebanon. Beirut, there's a Beirut-based group called Clown Me In, pictured here, which includes professional clowns from Lebanon, Syria, and other parts, but it's based in Beirut. And they use clown to present stories that they gather from kids around their communities. So they go and have interviews with children and get like the child's eye view on what's going on. And then they feed it back into the community through clown. And they have taken it on the road, and they are often featured in refugee camps. So they're really going into refugee camps, talking to refugee kids, and then helping everybody process what's going on by turning stories into physical comedy. Europe. We hate to say it, but but they also do it. So in ancient Rome, they also had jesters. They were called bellatrines, and they were hired to live in people's houses with them. Yeah, pretty intimate. And they were typically bought on the slave market, and also another instance of people with physical disabilities being forced into jesterhood. So it was a pretty fucked up situation. But that was not the only kind of clown going on in ancient Rome. There were actually 4 types of clowns in ancient Rome. The first one was called Sanio, and they were very popular, and they were mimes, famous for, in particular, using their faces in really intense ways. So it was really like, I'm not going to do it. But imagine someone doing a really gnarly face and everybody loving it. They didn't wear a mask. Most other clowns in Rome were wearing masks, but the Sanios were, again, it was their face that was the clown. So that's kind of, I'm just going to put a pin in masking as like a thing to think about more deeply at some point. Yeah, just put that in your pocket for later. Then there were the stupidus, which is Latin for mimic fool. Usually they were shaved bald or wore long pointed hats that were multicolored. We all know it. Famous for using innuendo and riddles, and burlesque and slapstick. Uh, this clown is our first kind of example. We'll see this over and over again of clowns using taboo and scandal in their art. And in particular, being some of the only people in the society that they're located in who are allowed to do that. Like they are the class of people who is given permission to just ride the scandal out and make everybody deal with it. So that was the stupidest. There was the Skura, which is like our lower class clown. That kind of was more for the working people. Interestingly and not surprisingly, there isn't as much research on those. Then there was the Moriones, which were kind of like the freaky ones. They were freaks, and they were kept in like great houses, like big rich guy houses. But they were believed to have powers from God. So they were kind of like the medium to tell rich guys the divine truth. And they were just super freaks and everybody respected them for it. I mean, if we can find some rich people to hire us to live in their houses and just be freaks at them, I think we should do it. Okay. So then Russia, since the 2nd century, they have been practicing a heliocentric celebration about the end of winter, and it's just like big time joy, light, sun festivities. And they have a clown that shows up called the Pit. Okay, here we go. Petrushka. And it's a character from the Ryok, which is a puppet theater that dates back all the way to the 17th century. And he's just a big buffoon with a long red nose and a tricorn, and he's famous and beloved and like a big part of Russian folklore. And then Russia also has another set of brothers. There's something about brothers that love each other, that make history in clowning. But the Russian brothers that I'm talking about were Anatoly and Vladimir. They lived late 1800s, early 1900s, and they really brought in the first generation of Russian clowns that were kind of like more influenced by other areas in Europe. And they were super focused on animals, which is super cool. So they took their inspiration from wildlife and worked with animals. Like this is kind of like some of the first times that we're seeing, yeah. We're seeing like big beasts be brought into the circus. And so they're working with animals and they are also building clowns off of animals. And I feel like that's kind of maybe hard to understand if you've never done clown before. But I feel like you get it enough. Okay, so then Greece, ancient Greece, clowns were known as rustics. They entertained audiences during festivals and theater productions. Again, classically using big exaggerated gestures and comedic routines to give comedic relief amongst very serious tragedies. They were often portrayed as like very simple people, which in the clown that I was trained in, that has persisted. The goal is really to take really big, complicated, confusing things and flatten them down into its simplest form, and then just put it up for people. So that is something that they were practicing in ancient Greece. In ancient Greek mythology, there are clown-like figures called Silenus, who served as companions to Dionysus, who's the god of wine and revelry, who's kind of like for real, the clown god. And the Sileni represented the uninhibited aspects of humanity, embodying both joyous celebration and excess, which we, again, see over and over again. Clowns are all about dialing it up to a 10 and then pushing it to an 11 and then taking it to a 20 and just seeing what that does to people. So yeah, that's what they were doing. But in general, you know, Northern Europe, including Scandinavia, Baltic states, Poland, Germany, and Western Europe, like France and Iberia, all of them had clowns through the Middle Ages. And this is kind of like because of, you know, white supremacy and European colonization. This is the clown that we hear the most about. So most people are familiar. This is the jester. Sometimes they were slaves, but sometimes they weren't. And they would kind of turn into a jack of all trades in entertainment spaces and brought into royal courts. There were acrobats, jugglers, storytellers, musicians. They did magic tricks, they told jokes, and there were every gender and sex was allowed to be a jester, which is like pretty much the only job that's true at this time in this place. So anybody's allowed to be this like bearer of scandal and humor, and a large part of that is because clowns are the ones who voluntarily, or not always, but they're tasked with taking on the lowest status in the room and then playing with it so that everybody notices status at large. And for whatever reason, there's a magic in that has historically like opened up that role to groups that traditionally don't get to mix and don't get to do the same work. Yep, so this is where we see the classic jester costume. Fun fact, the jester hat was supposed to be donkey ears and they fucked it up and now it is what it is. There was also this very elite clown called the Master of Christmas Events. And he was like the Lord of Misrule. And all of the jesters wanted to be the Master of Christmas Events. It was like a really big deal. And they were only if you were like a very, very good jester, where you granted permission and special privilege. And the job of the Christmas master guy was to mock the monarch during holiday times at All Hallows Eve and Candlemas rituals. So it's like this very prestigious position to go to the king and make fun of him to his face. And all of the clowns are like vying for this position, which is really confusing, but also very interesting. Yeah, and you know, along these lines, jesters were kind of put, like kings would employ jesters, and they were kind of tasked with being the social lubricant in tense situations. So they were supposed to like diffuse political discussions that were getting out of hand, or to help with diplomacy so that maybe war didn't have to happen, or their king got what they wanted out of a diplomatic conversation. They were also often sent between different kings and kingdoms to deliver messages that were like kind of icky and uncomfortable to deliver. So jesters were just like sent cross country to deliver bad news because they were the only ones who could do that well. They were the only ones, like they had such sophisticated social skills that they were like the ones who were trusted with some of like the highest level political work, because they could make it funny. And so they often like could bring peace between countries and communities that otherwise wouldn't have been achieved. Yeah, so again, jesters are seen as like this kind of coveted class that is certainly low status, but also is kind of higher status than anybody because they're the only ones that are allowed to tell the truth. Yeah, and then the last thing I'll say on European clowns, classically associated with the Feast of Fools, something that we celebrate in Clownbloc, which is a festival where social norms are temporarily overturned. So it's kind of like a night to freak out, and just like get your wiggles out and do all of your creepy stuff. And that was like the clown's job, was to hold this sacred space for people to just like do the wrong thing. Anything on Europe? that anybody has a question about before we move on?
Yeah, I'm wondering like protections for the jesters.
Protections?
Weird.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, you weren't safe. Like you were more welcome to say spicy shit and get in people's business than others, but you'd still get shot out of a cannon, you know? Like kings still suck. Yeah, I don't know. Like when you get into like how sophisticated their like social skills had to be to figure out what is the right, wrong thing to say right now that will keep me alive, but also accomplish this intense political mission. It's just it's very impressive. Especially when you think about how pissy European kings were. Like in world history, some of the least reasonable people that have ever existed. And the jesters were just like, all right, I'm gonna try and tell this guy something he doesn't want to hear. And they totally did get murdered for it, but less than other people. The Atlantic Islands. Ooh. Thanks. So Scotland, we got Mary, Queen of Scots, and her son, employed many famous court jesters. There was one in particular whose name was Armstrong. And he just kind of like rose to the status of superhero for Scotland. He was just the biggest, hottest guy. And he was just funny. Everybody loved him. This is like kind of one of the first moments that I was able to find in this region where clowns were just like hot shit. Because, you know, it's not always the case. Sometimes they're really, really, really not loved or respected. But in this case, they're starting to like hit stardom and communities are starting to be like, oh my God, this guy's the most important guy. He was eventually fired though, because he offended too many people that were too influential. But he still remained like a really big part of Scottish life. There's a lot of books about him still, even in Ireland. And frankly, no other clowns have ever been as famous as that guy in Scotland. And that's got to be rough, but they're still around. In Britain, there's also the classic royal courts throughout England and Ireland having their jesters, licensed fools, and they got paid for it. So this is like actual true employment for jesters. And again, we're seeing these buffoons become as famous as the royalty that they work for. There was this one in particular named Will Somers. He and his daughter Jane Fool were as famous as King Henry. And because of that, they ended up having, again, a lot of political sway. People really listened to them in a way that most people weren't getting listened to, in ways that even the royalty weren't getting listened to. And then, you know, we have Shakespeare, who did clowns and stuff. They were in Twelfth Night, King Lear. We don't have to talk about it though. And then in Ireland, before England got to it, Ireland had jesters, and they were amusing and they were also gnarly. Again, they were like witty, clever, absurd, nasty. But they were called gleemen, which is cute. And they traveled from place to place, spreading glee and also discomfort. And they were considered dishonorable and experienced a lot of oppression. So there's like, you know, again, we're seeing like this weird, how our society is treating their jesters. What does that mean? Food for thought. But everybody kind of hated them, but they didn't care. And they just kept on traveling from town to town, making everyone upset, which I really like for them. And they were also kings would sacrifice jesters in Ireland a lot to like prove a point. just fucked up. Um, but something kind of cool about the Atlantic Isles in general, jesters had a really interesting role in battle, in the battlefield. In the early Middle Ages, their job was to wage psychological warfare against enemy armies, and also boost their own army's morale, like the night before with stories and songs and jokes. But even like on the battlefield, when the two armies, because you know, like how war used to be, where there was like one army on, and then another army in a field, and they like looked at each other for a while. When they like took their positions, the jesters would go up and down the line on horseback, just like bullying the enemy and just making them feel dumb and distracted. And then also they would go up and down their own lines and be like really like making their own guys feel like they got it, making them feel confident and like bringing them in on the joke. And they would even like juggle swords and lances in front of the enemy and just taunt them with how cool they were and how stupid they were. And it even was a particular tactic to go up to enemy lines and do something so cool and impressive and say things that were so offensive and off guard that the enemy would start the battle before it was time. Um, and so they would sacrifice themselves and the fool would get killed, but also the enemy army lost their advantage because now they had broken rank and they were in chaos. Yeah, so pretty noble stuff. Nobody knows about that, but you should tell everyone. Okay, anything on Atlantic Isles before we move on to Indo-Pacific? Yeah.
Yeah. Curious if you have any specifics on the gnarliness or the nastiness.
Yeah, again, it's a lot of the nasty Irish clowns were known for doing really disgusting faces. So, like keeping in mind the kind of brittle, fragile social fabric of the time, these clowns would really go in and just like use their bodies and faces to make people feel really uncomfortable. Yeah. And also say shit that you're not supposed to say. But does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Just imagine like like that kid on the playground who just like does the worst face and it pisses all the other kids off so much. That was like their art form. Indo-Pacific, baby. Okay, so China. We'll start with China. In 1818 BC, one of China's rulers kind of broke the rules and just filled his court with clowns.
Yes.
And this was like in opposition to like sacred rights. Like you're not supposed to have a court full of clowns. But he did it. And ever since, since that, even after like rights were restored, clowns remained in Chinese courts. One of China's jesters named Yu Si is remembered as a national hero because he actually saved the lives of thousands of working people. Because at the time, the Emperor Shi Huangti wanted, I don't know if so many working people died building the Great Wall of China. It was like a really fucked up project that was not even remotely safe to do and also drove people to points of exhaustion and being overworked and being in dangerous situations. So a lot of workers were dying. And then this emperor wanted them to paint the thing white. And they were like, I can't do that. And this emperor was like, paint it white. And then this jester you see just joked around with this emperor long and hard and smart enough that he ditched the project and no one had to paint it white. And so he's literally considered a national hero by the working people because they were like, thank God you were there and we didn't have to do it because it would have killed more people. Because they don't have the construction tech to do that safely, and that wall is massive. So yeah, just a cool example of a clown talking down a crazy ruler. But yeah, this is kind of true just throughout China's history. Jesters were often in charge of tempering rulers, and kind of like cooling them off. Um, and sometimes they were punished. Um, but more often they were heavily rewarded. Like the emperors really loved their jesters typically. And they also had zaji, which were acrobats, referred to fondly throughout thousands of years of performing arts history. The Chinese acrobatics of this style emerged under the Qin dynasty, which was in 221 BCE, super long time ago. And actually, there's a particular comedy that these clowns took up that played a very important role under the Han Dynasty, where the Chinese acrobats did like a very complicated form of art that included aerial acrobatics and juggling and dressage and dances and fights and illusions and comedy. And it kind of just like changed the whole game on art. So like as much as we talk about clowns taking up a strong political role, it's worth saying that clowns are also important for cultural development, and are kind of breaking rules in theater and performance in ways that no one else is doing, and really expanding genres. So also in China, there's a comic actor which is called a Paiyu, which means that which relieves pain. So he is supposed to, or they are supposed to appear during celebrations, meetings, and other kind of like casual community time. And he has the job of pretending to be the emperor, and making everybody laugh at how dumb the emperor is. He tells stories, he uses a drum. He also is invited into funerals. And again, the name is that which relieves pain. So this clown's job is to go to the people and help them process their grief, and also to help them process the power abuse that they're going through every day, by helping them like really feel how small and stupid their emperor is. Yes.
Harder you said was, but,
Do it.
was this a weird work for the emperor or just like, okay.
No, I mean, I imagine that I think it's more just like a cultural icon who comes out and different people take up this role. Yeah. Yeah. And then in modern Chinese operas, there's a Chow, which is a clown, and just is doing funny stuff. So India, the Sanskrit drama is based on epic stories called the okay, here we go. Bear with me. Mahabharata and Ramayana began about 100 AD. So also just like, can we just appreciate how fucking long ago that is? And most of the dialogue was in Sanskrit, spoken by the gods, kings, ministers, generals, sages. And there was this clown called the Vidhushaka, who is the hero's servant and confidant. The Vidhushaka spoke Prakrit, which was the language of the general population, and interpreted everything for the audience. So this clown's job is, again, to be like next to the power people, and help the regular people get brought in. And then there is a special jester. Although there's so many just special jesters throughout all of this time and space that just remain super important parts of these places' histories. But this one called Tenali Rama was a king under King Krishnadevaraya. And he was like the only guy that can make this dude laugh. And there's one particular story where he made a joke, a physical comedy joke, where he made the king's guru carry him around on his shoulders in front of the king, which I guess was funny for them. But the king got pissed. The king was outraged. He was like, this is humiliating. This is a holy man, and you're making him do a goof. So the king sent some guards to beat him up. But then Tenali Rama jumped down and begged for forgiveness to the guru, insisting that they make amends by the guru riding on his shoulders. And the guru agreed because guru's down, you know. And when the guards arrived, the guru was beat up, and that sucks. But the king found the king thought that the trick was really funny, so he hired Tenali Rama as his full-time jester. So again, they're just kind of like they're just doing what they want, and they're turning everything on its head, and they're earning these places of respect and in systems of power. In Burma, when the kingdom was pagan, and destroyed by civil war in 1257 AD, scholars and writers fled to the countryside and inspired the country folk to hold pageants representing the life of the Buddha. The roles of the royal attendants were transformed into clown characters called Lu Biet, or frivolous men, which is another fun one. The clown characters known as the Lu Biet were supposed to provide comedic relief and social commentary between the scenes of the play, engaging in funny slapstick routines. So again, kind of like taking dense material and making it comprehensible and digestible for common people, which is incidentally one of the tactics that we'll talk about later. And again, we see Lu Biet characters are satirizing authority figures and societal norms and providing a subversive voice for people to seriously consider and also get to like feel. Like when you get people to laugh and cry because you're doing an embodied thing, they're not just like thinking about the analysis, they're letting it be in their body. And then in Australia, among the Murngan tribe, they have clowns, and it is their duty to act as outrageously as possible if men start fighting. So the clowns in this tribe, their whole gig is to watch out for men that are about to fight and then just be funny instead. And distract them so that they stop doing that. And dispel the aggression and help these men like figure out their problems. And nowadays in Australia, they have the Humor Foundation, which is a really big, thriving program of sending clowns into hospitals, which is another common thing we see across the world and is also a contemporary thing in a lot of places. We send clowns into hospitals because hospitals are where people are having a terrible time, and clowns can help you feel other things other than pain. Indo-Pacific, there you go. Any questions? Yeah.
Did you say that the guard beat up the Buddha?
Yep.
Because they thought he was the justice and he was on the bottom?
No, I think that they were just like, you're not supposed to do that. Which is really sad because the guru was being such a homie. And the jester was like, oh, dude, get in on this bit with me. It'll be fine. And then it just wasn't fine. So, yeah, there are intense consequences for these people. And that remains true to this day. Africa. So, in Mali, the ancient Malian city of Dijen, clowns played an important role in everyday life. They're generally members of the Wolosco caste, which is mostly former domestic slaves of various West African tribes. But despite having this very low status, the Dijens clowns are permitted to do or say whatever they want. So, we see a pattern emerging. The antics of the Wolosco clowns help relieve stress. This culture is very highly formal, so their clowns are pretty much the only people that are allowed to shake things up, get things loose. They also, again, are tasked with resolving disputes and conflicts. It's a very stratified society, and the clowns are some of the only people that are able to travel between the different social stratifications and resolve conflict and help people process their problems, and find peace in whatever ways possible. One of the ways that they do this is by being some very high-skilled bullies And they just tease people super bad. But they tease everybody the same amount. And so it just helps everyone get on the same level. Because there's this clown, he's not really like either of you, and he's just like pointing out how you're both dumb. And it just kind of resolves itself. They also like to get naked when things are intense and just kind of like distract everybody, which works. South Africa and Johannesburg hospitals, students are current, like this in contemporary South Africa, students are there's a program that students are often put through to do clown and bring laughter to folks in hospitals like we saw in Australia. And through this program, they've been doing studies that show that medical clowning markedly, concretely reduces anxiety and pain in patients and helps them cope with disease and injuries. Makes sense, but they did science about it. Then in Ghana, the peak season for clowns in Ghana is between Christmas and New Year's. The clowns are mostly fishermen from the greater Accra area, which is the coast region around the capital of Ghana, and they're renowned for being super funny and awesome and everybody loving them. They call themselves Amasi, which means masked men. So, again, masks. They are often dressed in very colorful costumes. They're juggling, they're dancing, they're making people laugh. They love young people and old people especially, but they go around to houses and neighborhoods and they bring their drums and they invite the children out and the children join the show, which is cute. They move and sometimes they'll like bring kids with them from village to village and just be like, you're in the circus now, come along. And again, their main job is to help people cope with pain. And they're beloved. These are people that get invited into people's homes, always have like a place to sleep, always have food to eat, because they're just a really important part of cultural life. And everybody understands that what they're doing is essential for community well-being. And then Equatorial Guinea, the Nadawe people live along the banks of the Rio Muni. They have the Makuyo, which is their clown, and he's pictured here. They are completely covered in small bamboo canes, which are tied together. Their hands and feet are covered in dark stockings. Their face is a mask of bright white, red, and black. And he's supposed to look kind of scary. They're commonly featured at weddings, social events, celebrations generally. But if the Makuyo falls or their costume is jumbled in any way and you can see underneath it, everyone's supposed to look away, because if you see under the costume, you're basically cursed. So yeah, I don't know. For all of the theater nerds out there, it's interesting costume stuff. Yeah, and then I have a lot of information about, they have one particular ceremony, or the way that this clown, the Makuyo, is treated in these massive celebrations is very particular. So there's like a big ceremony around this clown. And it's like very highly prepared. It's very specific, usually out front in some kind of courtyard or out in front of whatever building it's happening. There's a feast for the clown. The family organizing will put the clown in a prominence chair or a throne, and bring them drinks and food, and all of the women gather around them and do a particular dance. And then when it's time, the Makuyo does their dance. And this dance that the Makuyo does is a very big deal. And these people won't tell anyone why it's a big deal or what it does. It's a secret. So we don't know.
Okay.
But we know that it happens. And we know that it's important. Anything on Africa?
I am curious about the just what it is like for the clown, without without the specific, costume, uh, makeup oriented, without this moment of ritual, how things keep moving along. Do they get totally derailed if we're not able to tag in?
Like if they can't recover from the costume falling off or something?
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. To be honest, I don't super know. My impression from what I researched is that they can recover from a costume slip. It's just that the costume is a really big part of what the clown is. So you don't clown without the costume. And you don't watch the clown without their costume. Does that help?
Yes.
Cool.
Thank you.
Yeah. North America. That's where we are. What the heck? So we got the Lakota and Dakota tribes. Their clowns are called Heyokas. And they are people of contrasts. They do everything backwards, to heal illnesses in their community through laughter and dances and rituals and really inverting logic on its head. So I have some quotes from various indigenous researchers and also just like cultural workers. This one is from someone named John Fire Lame Deer. And it goes like this. A Heyoka has a strange behavior. He says yes when he means no. He rides his horse backwards. He puts on his moccasins or boots the wrong way. In winter, when the temperature drops below -40, he puts on a bathing suit and announces that he's going for a swim to cool down for a little while. Yeah, so just a backwards person that kind of helps everybody reconsider what is normal. In the Canadian Dakota tribe, the people consider the clown to be the most powerful of shamans because they derive their power from the spirit clown. So another quote from someone of that lineage goes like this. Sometimes we encounter Heyoka, the trickster teacher, on the sacred path. This contrary clown is a spiritual counselor to us humans who teaches us through laughter and opposites. Heyoka will make you wonder if what you're doing or saying is actually correct, which will then make you think and figure it out for yourself. When the trickster teacher gets you to look at the beliefs you use as a crutch on your own, you might find that the crutch breaks and you land on the ground on your rear end. Heyoka has taught you a lesson. If the opposite happens and the crutch stands firm and holds you up, you have gained a knowing system for your life. Heyoka, and then this is from Beverly Two Feathers. Heyoka is known for creating lessons at the expense of others' seriousness. This will break the bonds that destroy balance in our lives. The trickster teacher will not create a lesson of laughter that would harm the soul of the seeker. He will see this insecurity and turn to laughter towards himself, knowing the seeker will get the message anyway. In Native traditions, no one would have found offense if the spiritual counselor used them for a lesson. In fact, most would have felt quite honored to have the Heyoka play a trick on them. Anyone seeing the prank or talking about it later would also grow from the lesson. So a really cool example of clowns helping people dig into their internal shit. And find their own life lessons and also find humility and be honored to be made humble in the face of their own flaws. Which, I just like, can you imagine if that was something that was like culturally prioritized where we are and what a difference that would make? Oh yeah, I'm having fantasies. Yeah, and then the Hopi and Pueblo people practice burlesquing the sacred, and that is the way to support the sacred. They practice a kachina dance featuring heavy clown satire to critique individuals in the audience on behaving in ways that are out of line with the Hopi way of life. Another quote from someone in the research that I did, from the Hopi people. We simply come out and show the people that what they're doing is wrong and put social pressure on them by having it done publicly. And because of this, we don't need jails as the white people do. So I think about that a lot. Among the Hopi, there are 5 figures who serve as clowns. There's the Payakayamu, the Kosher or Koya'ala or Hano clown, the Tsuzuku, and the Tatsikto or Koyashimi or Mudhead, and the Quick Wiliyak. With the exception of Kosher, each is a Kachinam or personification of a spirit. In the Hopi tradition, the sacred clown Cochina frequently disrupts and makes a holy mess out of some of the most vital and fundamental rituals. The clown is tasked with satirizing Hopi life by acting out and exaggerating improper behavior. So many times the actions of the clowns are meant to portray a lesson on a behavior apparent in some tribal member. And their purpose is to show how that behavior is incorrect. So they'll take some community members doing something fucked up, and then they'll do it back to that community member, but in an exaggerated way, so that that community member can see why it's wrong. And it works. And they don't have prisons. The Koshari play tricks, act out absurd pantomimes, cleverly mimic spectators. The clown helps maintain community harmony by reminding the people of acceptable standards of behavior within the Hopi community. So this is an example of clowns really being tasked with maintaining the right way to treat each other. And then over to the Navajo people, they practice the Navajo night chant, where clowns get in the way of holy dancers and play tricks throughout a ceremony. Clowns burlesque performances of magic, using sleight of hand tricks and jokes. The Navajo god of water is known as Tonaneli, who is responsible for bringing rain and is depicted as a comedian or fool who argues with the god of gambling. So just a god who's a clown. And then lastly, the Ojibwa would send their clown doctors into battle, another battle clown example, against large armies of Sioux warriors. And they would dance and dance and dance and dance and dance and dance until finally their enemies considered them gods. And it was over. Yeah, so it's just like, what kind of unexpected, confusing thing can we do so hard that no one remembers why they're there? And then the war is over. And clowns are also tasked with dealing with any kind of spiritual illness. Yeah, I have more on that, but it's a little specific and it has a word that I'm not supposed to use, so I won't. Anything on this? Yeah.
Like, at what way this is, that these, dress up beings serves chanting and like, spirit, versus with like, something spiritual.
Mm-hmm.
Or is that a different thing?
So very often, folks, learn about spirits. So in a lot of the paternal identity practices, there are scripted, like there are stories and narratives that are shared, but they're not necessarily scripted, or even like a heroes or something like that. So really, once the person who is invoking various secret invokes the software, and depends on the tribal community and the tradition, but some of them are so elaborate, like the ones on through for the like whole process to get into and welcome you for spirit, and I'm assuming you're all the pharmaceuticals that are afterwards. And it would be as simple as the person who is trained specifically with, I don't know, them, for elders and spirits and ancestors, have like their own individual kind of ritual that they then are like, all right, this is spirit, we're gonna go do the thing. We're gonna do, well, we do the thing and they would stuff. So it just, and, you know, but, I would say anytime to have a specific, I'm more familiar with maybe cultural indigenous. So in particular, once the conference and vote or ceremony there, the class is every. They weren't necessarily, it wasn't like a consistent way of health, it was more something that they were like born with, almost considered sometimes like a mental illness because they were afterwards. But it did bring in like accepting, let's say now, the only of thinking that it was able to like listen to what they have to say about the fact more than like sometimes like listen. Yeah.
I believe you. Yeah. Totes. Okay, Central and South America, let's go. Starting in Peru. Every year in Peru on May 25th, they celebrate the Clown Day. And it's like everybody does it. And it's in honor of Jose Alvarez Velez, who was, his clown name was Tony Perejil, who was a clown for the people, and the people just were in love with him. He was called the clown of the poor because he performed in low-income neighborhoods and donated a portion of his earnings to the people there. So kind of like dual tactic of bringing about joy and connective time and also helping get people some concrete needs met. And they still celebrate him to this day. In Brazil, the Hochchuas of the Krano tribe in northern Brazil have the and so the Hochchuas, that's the name for the clown. They're tasked with bringing the community together with joy. They're called laughter priests, who are entertaining the community, and they again are inverting behavioral codes and social scripts. The face and sometimes the body of these clowns are symbolically made up in red, black, and white. And I don't know if anybody remembers, but those three colors have come in a few different times. So that's interesting. They are considered sacred and representing an element of balance. So they're bringing balance back to the people. In search of laughter in everyday life, offering the possibility of seeing life from other angles. They contribute to the social structures of the tribe. And there's a whole documentary about them if you want to check it out. I'll text you. Then in Mexico, they got the dancing clowns down in Mexico. They come out to celebrate religious symbols like the Lady of Guadalupe, or otherwise known as the Mother with the Serpent Skirt, the indigenous way of knowing her. They appear at festivities and they celebrate saints and holy days. Veracruz, which is a state rich with cultural religious celebrations, is really just crawling with clowns. Ever since the earliest days of Spanish settlement, the clowns have been a really big part of ritual and celebratory moments. They're just kind of always around. And in particular, there's one particular cultural event or dance called Dance of the Feather, which is a story that recreates the Moctezuma-Cortez clash, and uses clown to analyze that power struggle. and where the people are impacted and how the people are impacted still. In Chile, activist clowns are prominent. Oh, whoa. They can be seen at community events, they're at farmers markets, but they're also blocking traffic. Their actions don't necessarily express something revolutionary all the time, but they are commonly trying to show people how to be good, even if it means disrupting the ways that they're being bad. So, in a society that is really decomposed by capitalism and corrupt authorities, the clowns are considered a really rebellious, liberating, and spiritual act. And whoever encounters them will say that was a better day. Clowns make your life strange and funny and interesting and help your mind grow. So, a couple more moments to yourself. What information was particularly impactful, interesting, surprising? Return to your initial questions if you like that, and consider how they've developed or been answered. So, how does it get political, you may ask?
How does it get political? How does it get political?
I'm so glad you asked. According to my calculations, it gets political in 8 ways. And this is just my autism, so your autism might help you see other ways. And I want there to be space for that, although it will not be featured in this presentation. So from what I gathered through my cultural research, clowns across time and space have used spectacle, farce/satire, truth-telling, power-bending, humor/joy, healing, unity building, and infiltration as primary tactics of political action. So we're gonna just go through some examples of how this is true. Oh yeah.
Thank you for saying that. Yeah.
Right now. We can also post these slides on Insta maybe, if people will like that. Also, I can just send these slides to whoever, and all of the sources are listed in the speaker notes.
Hell yeah.
So you can just check out
Cite your sources.
where it all comes from. You good? Okay. So, tactic numero uno, spectacle. Here is a really incredible clown in Palestine named Uncle Tito. We love him. He is really holding it down over in Palestine. He's still clowning within a genocide and bringing really profound joy to the people through really unapologetic, big, loud spectacle. He uses really bright public displays of silliness. He's on his unicycle, he's on stilts, he uses noise machines, and he posts videos pretty regularly, and you'll just see like huge crowds of families and kids around him. Like he can really pull out a lot of people, and it's like they're all having a moment of being happy together and a moment of having their lives not just be horror and pain. And he's also fundraising. So all of these incredible videos are going online, and he is raising money all over the world through his performance and then giving that material support to the people of Palestine. So, just like a literal hero. For the example of healing, I just wanted to get back to the clown doctors of South Africa, although they are featured all over the place. In the words of Portia Malakome, when the clowns get here, they start playing, forgetting they have pain and all that. So across, across human history, across the oceans. We are seeing clowns help people expand their capacity for healing. Then some examples of farce or satire. In Chile, they have the Chilensis Clown Circus. They're a pretty big deal. They came about in particular in October of 2019 when Chile was really in a particular moment of political tension, inequality, corruption, anger was really exploding. Protesters were hitting the streets. The neoliberal system was perpetuating horrific violations of people's human rights and exacerbating their socioeconomic issues. And we could just talk about that all day long. But the thing that I want to bring to you now is this guy. His name is Puntete. The clown's name is Puntete. He's the clown police. And he went to support the self-organized demonstrations by the working class in the street, and intervened with satire of police officers and really like exaggerating and showing the absurd violence that the police were committing against the people, to the police themselves, but also just to like everyone there, to help consolidate everyone's understanding of what was going on, who the bad guys were, and what it is that is wrong about that. Highly recommend looking into him. Yeah, a good example of using satire to ridicule those in power and bring everybody into community around that. An example of truth telling. I mean, I think that we just saw a bunch of examples in our history deep dive, but the dancing clowns in Mexico, in the words of their founder, they use syncretism, which is the merging of unrelated beliefs into a religion, was used by colonizers as a tool to exercise power over a community. The Mexican clown, she hopes, bear witness to that history, however lost it may seem today. So really being story holders and keeping track of the people's history and the people's analysis through time, regardless or irregardless of how colonizers and imperialists and capitalists try to rewrite history and take our stories away from us. And using these really gorgeous, bright patterns and costumes. And the costumes for the dancing clowns in Mexico are extremely detailed and intricate. Every single layer is filled with historical symbolism. So the way that the story is being kept is not just in the way that the clown is performing, it's in every aspect of how the clown is brought to the streets. Power bending. We got the clandestine insurgent rebel clown army in the US and UK. We actually are connected to, well, I'm connected to these dudes. They're like theoretical. One of the guys who did it, like wrote down a lot of their theory, named L.M. Bogad, is still, I think, in Seattle. And one of the people who was in the clown army now lives in Portland. And I've been trying to get them to join Clownbloc for a long time, but that's another story. The clandestine insurgent rebel clown army is, I feel like, an example that more people know about. They're the ones who have been going out over the last like 10 years in the US and UK and really just making police look so stupid. So an example from L.M. Bogad: the police shoved us, chased us, and searched us, finding our preset standard issue circa police search items, sex toys, flower petals, bouncy balls. We carry these things that will look absurd when we are inevitably surrounded and searched. The media covers these searches to comic effect, which calls attention to the over-policing of free assembly. Yeah. And then humor and joy. This is an example from Periante in the Philippines. For anybody that doesn't know, the Philippines has like an incredibly badass revolution going on. And so in the 1980s, when Marcos Sr., the puppet president of the Philippines, was doing martial law, the University of the Philippines, their students created a political street group called Periante, which meant fair or carnival. So from 1980 to 1986, this group combined with some others to just make a massive street theater presence. And they would occupy the College of the Arts and Science lobby, and they would stage Ilu Kula at the oath-taking of newly elected Student Council President Leon Alejandro. Leon Alejandro went on to be the chairman of Bayan, which is one of the leading legal organizations in the National Democratic Movement to liberate the Philippines. But the play Ilocula had been based on an article that Alejandro had written called "What Are We in Power For?" And this really focused on the Marcos family's cronies, the military officers whose guns and tanks gave the regime its teeth. The Prime Minister, Cesar Virata, became General Beretta, while the Armed Forces of the Philippines Commanding Officer Fabian Ver and Defense Minister Juan Ponce Enrile became twin monster revolver barril. So really making like comical, absurd versions of all of these power heads that were waging war against the people. And they would do this play in places where power was being negotiated. Yeah, they used puppets, they used improv, they used parody. I don't know if anybody knows, but Marcos Senior's wife, Imelda, is like notorious for being a huge shithead, and like stealing the people's money and then using it to buy like jewelry and shoes and stuff. And they did like a clown version of her where she's saying about the true, the good, and the beautiful. And yeah, in the words of Joy Barrios, who was one of the students, we were simply clowns in a time of repression. Yeah, I would like to believe that 50 years later, many of my fellow theater artists and I remember martial law with both humor and steadfast commitment to the National Democratic Movement. Then unity building, Clown Me In Lebanon. In their words, we believe that art should serve society by helping to initiate a healthy democratic debate away from political tension and alienation. We are therefore committed to transmuting the values of freedom and social justice through our artistic work as clowns while seeking to engage in dialogue with people who do not necessarily share our values. So, you know, tale as old as time, clowns going into groups that don't know how to talk to each other and helping them figure out how to be on a united front against a common enemy. And lastly, infiltration, how to use the court jesters. Perhaps the reason for the clown's ability to advise kings is that the jesters are generally of inferior social and political status and are not in a position to pose a power threat. They have little to gain by caution and little to lose by candor, apart from liberty, livelihood, and occasionally even life. They are peripheral to the game of politics, and this can reassure a king that their words are unlikely to be geared to their own advancement. The ruler can be isolated from his courtiers and ministers who might conspire against him. The jester, too, can be an isolated and peripheral figure, somehow detached from the intrigues of the court, and this enables him to act as a kind of confidant. So yeah, how can clowns use humor and the unexpected to influence people in power and infiltrate their decision making? And that's what I came up with. What I would like to do is give everybody another like 30 seconds to 1 minute, now that we're at the end of all of the information, to reflect on your questions and just have some time inside your own head with how your knowledge and your questions have evolved. And then I would like to hear from people if anybody has things to say